love cooking. To me, cooking is one of the greatest love languages. Whether I am making pasta from scratch or I just have some freezer burned vegetable mix that I'm about to try to turn into fried rice, no matter what ingredients you are starting with, if you take time and put in effort, you can make something fantastic. Some people need a recipe to get from point A to point B, but it doesn't make it any less loving. And some people just throw stuff together in a pot and somehow it turns out good each time. And even when my fridge has nothing but a soda and condiments in it, I still find a way to feed people if they're coming. I bought a house that's mortgage is half of what the cheapest rent is up here because this kitchen, specifically these countertops, the rest of this I did by myself. All this was me. This was me. This was me. I walked in, I saw countertops, and the rest of the place was a disaster, and I said, I can't afford this, but I can make that. And I was willing to put so much effort, love, and care into the place because this is my happy place. Sometimes I sit right at the bar stool right there to do my planning. And that's because to me, the greatest tool I've ever had for D&D was knowing how to cook. And caffeine. So to start, I think one of the biggest ways of balancing at the table is actually empathy. I think that it's something that's very underrated when it comes to having a bunch of people at your table, reading the room. Sometimes it's not always about the exact numbers that are on the page, but how those numbers are making your players feel. Now, that's not to say that D&D should be cushy. Sometimes, if your players are yawning or slouching or not really paying attention, it's time to beef up the combat a little bit. Whereas if somebody is literally on the verge of tears and really stressed out making death saves, maybe you don't have a monster target the already down player while there's 4 other people still attacking it. Crazy concept. Crazy concept, I know, but something to consider maybe. Empathy is your pots and pans. It is what you need to really cook anything. Sure, you can microwave on a plate and you'll be able to give somebody food, but if you really want to cook a hearty meal, you're gonna need your dishware. I find being able to read a room is really the foundation for hosting a good, solid table. Bringing that back to session 0 and getting to know your players is super important, but session to session, as you get to understand their body language, that's where your focus should be. One of the reasons why I love working with D&D 5e is not necessarily that it's a perfect system, but simply because I know it so well that I know that my focus can be 110% on my players. Most of my sessions I DM, you'll find me pacing behind my DM screen. I can't sit because I want to have bird's eye hawk view of what each and every player is doing. Some great examples of this is seeing one player very, very tense, but everybody else seems to be relaxed. I might send a quick Snapchat to them while we're at the table. Hey, what's going on? So that way it's not disruptive to everybody, putting a pause or putting them on blast. Sometimes that's seeing new players in a combat alongside veterans and making sure to put more of the focus on the veteran players as a new players start hyperventilating because they don't know their abilities and they think they have an idea for their turn. Oh God, I thought you... Give them some time. Sometimes this is also seeing one of your players making a very devious look when you tell them not to do something and you have to, look at me, look at me, no, look at me, no, look, no. And sometimes that's seeing your players are having a lot of fun and you just start adding a little bit of health to your monsters or adding a couple of mobs in. To me, numbers are not end all be all in D&D. To me, numbers are the guidelines, the standard around what it should take for people to have fun. This may sound pretty blasphemous to some of you, but we scum some rolls behind the screen, and that's okay. Not all the time, and it shouldn't be the standard, and you shouldn't just do wibbly wobbly whatever you want, but I think of these things as guidelines. Similar to a recipe. You can't change out flour for just rice. Rice flour maybe, but you can't just take a bag of rice and just put it into a recipe instead of flour. You can't switch out cocoa powder for cinnamon in the same amounts. For the love of all that is good in this world, please don't replace garlic with ginger. But if you want to substitute salt for umami, or if you're making gluten-free baked goods, adding a little pudding cup to that, those little tweaks and changes are what make that your own and make it so much more delicious. If you ever need to bake gluten-free, please add a pudding cup into your recipe. Next comes the ingredients, which is having the right player characters for your story. Building together the perfect group comes down to a lot of session zero work, or knowing the group for a long time, pre-prepping, or getting lucky. But a good group of aligned characters can make the difference between trying to put together some freezer burn food and having fresh ingredients from the market. It's so much easier to DM for a table that is decently put together. We also can't forget another basic, utensils. What you use to cook, what you use to eat later. I like to think of that as your system and your tools. For some, that's systems that use minis and dice. But some systems use different dice, or no dice at all. Think about a sloppy pasta versus tacos. If you're eating spaghetti with your fingers, it's not gonna work. But as far as cooking tacos, there's microwavable kits that you can just throw out, and honestly, it makes people just as happy as a full cooked meal. But choosing what system matters a lot too. For me, it may be D&D 5e, my friend's Pathfinder. Some of the other people I know have all different types of super cool systems that they are just now trying, and indie systems. There's one that I'm really excited about, Tales from Elsewhere, that is looking so incredible. So now that you have your utensils, you got your pots, you got your ingredients, now comes into the process of planning. Being familiar with all these pieces and making sure you have a well thought out plan, that is key to being able to balance on the fly. Now, what well thought out means to each individual is going to be different. And that also fluctuates with how familiar you are with your players and your system. If I have a group of players I'm not super familiar with, I tend to do a lot more planning. It's a lot more rigorous. I have point A, B, C, D. Whereas when I'm playing with a group that I know, I have an idea of what to expect even if I don't know their player characters very well. For games like that, I can go in with, well, nothing. I have this super cool thing from my bonus mom that is a keychain of a D20 that if you unclip this, there is a miniature dice set. I usually keep this with me every place. And before I had the tiny to-go one, I always had a little box in my backpack. Because as long as I have dice, I can run a session. But not everybody is as confident in their system or their players that way. So that's when we have the people who cook without looking at a single recipe whatsoever, tossing things like a madman into a pot, and somehow it's the best meal you've ever had, versus the people who have to have the full printed out recipe and they are checking the boxes as they go along. What method works for you is really, really important here, because if you are doing all this advanced planning, there's not a lot of wiggle room for your player characters to mess around with stuff. It's doable, it will turn out good, but this empathy comes much less into play, and balancing on the fly doesn't have much room to work here. However, when you're confident enough to just throw ingredients you know into a pot, and time again it seems to be working, you have a lot more room to collaborate with your players at the table and balance on the fly. Now, the way I look at balancing is like tasting a meal as you go along. You can tell if there's a bit too much salt, or if you could use a little sugar. Now, if the recipe called for a full cup of salt and then you tasted it was inedible, you just couldn't, would you just leave it that way because that's how the recipe said to do it? Or would you say dilute it with a little bit of water and then throw in some onion powder and something a bit more hearty, like maybe some paprika, to kind of change the flavor profile up so that salt isn't so overbearing? Maybe even a little splash of brown sugar. That's balancing. That's reading your players and being able to address them at the table. Some of the ways that I do that are easy is if they reach the max health of a monster, but it's only been one round of combat and people are just now starting to get excited, I will give that a second boss phase. If they're fighting, say, an owl bear and they kill it in a very quick round, hey, let's throw in a necromancer, and this was just a front for it. The owl bear gets up, its bones starting to protrude from its back as it turns into this horrible aberration in front of them. If they're starting to dwindle down the boss and I can't think of anything creative like that, I might throw in some mobs that rip them off. Doing dungeon puzzles of different areas affecting the field in different ways and the boss moving around that, maybe those puzzles are what step it up a notch. I have had in some of my comments that I'm too easy on my players because by the rules I give them a lot of leeway to not die by the stats. But that's because my combats are a lot more active because I'm balancing 15 things at once at the table, which gives me a lot of playroom for how to give and take. Another way I'll do this is by having an NPC come in to help them. These are NPCs that they have made an impact on. Not some random town guard, but maybe the shopkeep that they saved turns out is an artificer and he went and grabbed his suit. But the way that I balance is by moving all these different pieces around the battlefield. Again, we're making a robust dish here. I'm not simply going to throw rice into my wok and put some butter on it. Yes, that's food, that's sustenance, it will feed you, you will enjoy it. But that's not for me. And having all those flavors for the profile is fantastic. The next part is presentation. When you go to bring somebody a dish, again, you can put it onto a plate and give it to them and call it a day. But I love to make it pretty, even if it's a simple meal, even if it's something that I toss together. If it's somebody I care about, which I always care about my players, I like to make something that is appetizing even before you taste it. To me, presentation is just as important as any other of these moving pieces. Presentation is your immersion. Do you simply walk in and say, hey guys, boss fight time? I'm sure it works. I'm sure they get very excited to roll initiative, but for me, I much more prefer to set the scene. You trace your fingers along this tome that you can't quite make sense of, placed on this podium. They start to glow as you hear this mechanical whirring start to kick in the distance. The room begins to light up and move and come to life as you feel the overwhelming feeling that you are someplace you probably shouldn't be. Turning to glance at the door, you watch as it spins to close and seal in you and your companions. The very large mural that once looked down upon you is slowly pulling itself free from the tethers that is the art piece it was once a part of. And as this beast comes to life and roars down over you, I need y'all to roll initiative. That ladder, that's what keeps my players coming back. It also opens the door to encourage players to get very into their own roles as well. One of my players tutting at the table to be able to describe how Maze looked as their imagery started to pull back and repeat. Another one of my players describing how they're slashing into a false hydra as its heads are coming down to collapse onto him. One of them taking their abyssal tentacles and slamming a BBG against a wall, slicing it into pieces. This creativity is not something that comes overnight. Not every player will have it to begin with, and moreover, even players who do have it might not be the most open to share at a table that says, okay, let's roll for initiative, the boss is here. Encouraging your players through presentation is something that I am deeply, deeply in love with. And then getting to enjoy the dish together at a table as a family, friends, or whatever style of relationship you have with these loved companions of yours. That is playing the game. They're the moments we live for, and what brings the community together as a whole. There are some people who will definitely argue with you that sushi is an art form that is one of the greatest foods mankind ever created, and there's other people who retch at the idea of raw fish. And even if there's the in-between of a cucumber and avocado roll, they butt heads a lot. And just like our community, we butt heads a lot. Be it in the comments, call-outs, or full channels dedicated to drama in the D&D community. This is my call-out to you guys, to choose to enjoy a dish together instead of fighting over what's the best to eat. Share our favorite recipes without getting a little antsy about them adding some smoked paprika. It is in coming together and sharing all of these parts that we get to make these awesome adventures together. Even separate tables sharing information builds even better in the community and as individuals. And this is where I tell you about D&D Tuber Dungeon Jam. A bunch of us are getting together to each create a 5-room dungeon. They are for you guys to enjoy and fall in love with, be it using it at your tables or just stealing bits and pieces. We're gonna be releasing this in the spring and compiling one big playlist that you can all pick and choose from. And if you are a creator with at least 5 videos on your YouTube, we would love to have you join us. If you reach out to me on Discord, I can help get you involved, but it is positive, good vibes only. We want to encourage growing together and building a more positive community here on YouTube. So if you're interested, like I said, let me know. If you're looking forward to it, I am not opposed to any of you viewers dropping ideas in the comments below that I may or may not steal. I have my dungeon up here. I gotta put it on paper, but there is room for some NPCs. And treasures. Please give me treasures. I'm terrible at picking items. Either way, no matter what you're excited for, be it at your own table or our dungeon jam, I hope to see you around soon, and I hope you have nothing but high rolls and awesome adventures until then. Bye, guys! And cute jacket. Can I win some props for the jacket? Oh, awesome. How about that one? Thank you. Can I get enough? That's my boy. Gentle, gentle. Yeah, my boy.